Sydney police say they're on the cusp of solving the murder of former bikie boss Mick Hawi. He was shot dead outside a suburban gym earlier this year.
2 Sydney contract killers have been found guilty of the execution-style murder of Underworld figure Gavin capable Preston.
There are new clues tonight in a Gangland mystery, the execution-style killing of Bilal Hamzy in the CBD. Police have released security video of 2 cars and are urging anyone with information to speak up.
Violence in Australia's underworld is nothing new. But over the past few decades, gangland killings have become more brazen and more public. A man executed in front of children at a football clinic. Another shot dead in the heart of the Sydney Central Business District. Others killed outside gyms, inside shopping centres, in restaurant car parks and on suburban driveways in broad daylight. These killings have shown just how far Australia's underworld is prepared to go, with gunmen striking in public places where innocent people can be only metres away. This video looks at some of the most shocking gangland executions in Australian history. Some became infamous because of where they happened, others because of the people who were targeted and the criminal wars behind them. We start with one of the most notorious figures from Sydney's underworld, Danny Karam. Karam ran one of the most feared criminal crews in Sydney's King's Cross during the 1990s. Known as the DK Boys, the group was heavily involved in cocaine distribution and had a reputation for violence. But by late 1998, Karam had made enemies within his own crew. According to later court findings, disputes over money and loyalty had turned some of the men closest to him against him. On the 13th of December 1998, Karam was sitting in his car outside one of the gang's safe houses when he was ambushed. The gunman knew where to find him, approached the vehicle and opened fire at close range. What made the killing even more significant was who was believed to be behind it. Karam had not been taken out by a rival gang. The murder was linked to members of his own DK Boys crew. No one was ever convicted of his murder, but Karam's death showed just how quickly power and loyalty could collapse in Sydney's underworld. The men around him had once helped enforce his reputation. In the end, some of those same men were accused of turning against him. At almost the same time, Melbourne was heading towards the most violent period in its underworld history. Alphonse Gangitano was a major figure in the Carlton crew and one of the city's most feared gangsters. He was well connected, mixed with lawyers and business figures, and had built a reputation for violence. On the 16th of January, 1998, Gangitano was shot dead inside his own home in Templestowe. There was no forced entry, leading police to believe he knew the person who killed him and had allowed them inside. Jason Moran and fellow underworld figure Graham Kinnebro were later linked to the property that night, but no one was ever charged with Gangitano's murder. His funeral brought together some of Melbourne's biggest underworld figures, with hundreds of mourners filling the church and gathering outside. Gangitano's murder became the first major killing of what would develop into the Melbourne Gangland War, a bloody period of violence that would eventually claim dozens of lives. One of the most shocking executions in Australian underworld history was the murder of Jason Moran, the man many hold responsible for igniting the Melbourne Gangland War after shooting Carl Williams in 1999. But before Jason was killed, his brother Mark Moran became the first major casualty in the destruction of the Moran family. In June 2000, Mark was shot dead outside his Aberfeldy home, just 8 months after the shooting of Williams. 3 years later, on the 21st of June 2003, Jason Moran was sitting in a van with Pasquale Barbaro at a children's football clinic in Essendon when a gunman approached and opened fire. Both men were killed, with 5 children inside the van left unharmed. The location made the murder especially shocking. The gunman had opened fire at a busy junior football clinic, surrounded by children and families, showing little regard for public safety. Less than a year later, the violence reached the head of the family. On the 31st of March 2004, Lewis Moran was drinking at the Brunswick Club on Sydney Road when two gunmen entered the crowded venue, found him and shot him dead. Carl Williams later pleaded guilty to organising the murders of both Jason and Lewis Moran. The killings continued even after the Gangland War had largely ended. In June 2009, Lewis Moran's brother Des Moran was followed into the Ascot Pasta and Deli Cafe and shot dead. In a final and extraordinary chapter in the destruction of the Moran family, Lewis's widow, Judy Moran, was later convicted of organising Des's murder. Over 9 years, Mark, Jason, Lewis, and Des Moran were all executed, wiping out an entire generation of one of Melbourne's most infamous crime families. A year before Jason Moran was killed, another major figure in Melbourne's underworld was executed. On the 1st of May 2002, Victor Pearce was sitting in his car outside a supermarket in Port Melbourne when he was shot dead in broad daylight. Pearce came from one of Melbourne's most notorious crime families and had previously been tried and acquitted over the 1988 murders of 2 Victorian police officers. No one has ever been convicted of his murder. The violence continued in October 2003, when drug dealer and former kickboxer Michael Marshall was shot dead outside his South Yarra home in front of his young son. Carl Williams later pleaded guilty to organising Marshall's murder, along with the murders of Jason Moran and Lewis Moran. Not every major underworld execution during this period was connected to Melbourne's Gangland War. In 2006, senior Bandidos figure and chapter president Rodney Monk was lured from a restaurant by someone he knew and trusted. Tensions inside the club had reportedly been growing over leadership and control, and Monk was taken into a nearby laneway where he was shot dead. The man responsible later took his own life rather than face arrest. Monk's murder was another example of how quickly loyalty could disappear inside Australia's outlaw motorcycle clubs, with a dispute between men from the same club ending in an execution. Sydney was also experiencing its own wave of targeted underworld killings. In September 2009, businessman Michael McGurk, who had extensive links to organised crime, was shot dead outside his home, while his young son waited in the car and witnessed the attack. McGurk had been locked in a bitter dispute with property developer Ron Medish over money and business dealings, and Medish was later convicted of ordering the killing, which the sentencing judge described as a contract murder carried out in execution style. 4 years later, in December 2013, Sydney standover man Joseph Antoon was shot dead outside his Strathfield home in another carefully planned execution. Members and associates of Brothers for Life were later convicted over the murder, which would become even more significant years later when investigators linked Antoon's killing to the motive behind another high-profile Sydney execution. Walid Ahmad was a feared figure in Sydney's underworld, with a reputation for violence and a name that carried serious weight across the city's criminal world. On the 29th of April 2016, he was sitting at a cafe inside the busy Bankstown Central shopping centre when a gunman approached and opened fire. Ahmad was shot dead in front of shoppers in the middle of the afternoon, while 2 innocent bystanders were also wounded in the attack. The gunman then fled through the shopping centre and escaped in a waiting car. Despite the public location and the number of people nearby, no one has ever been convicted of Ahmad's murder. The execution took only seconds, but carrying it out inside a crowded shopping centre showed just how little regard the killers had for witnesses or the safety of innocent people. That same period saw several other Sydney underworld figures killed in planned and highly public attacks. In March 2016, Michael Davey was lured from his Kingswood home under the pretense of a drug deal before being shot dead nearby. Abazar Sultani and Siara Munshizada were later convicted over the execution. 7 months later, Hamad Assad, known as the Executioner because of his reputation for violence, was gunned down outside his George Hall home by shooters who arrived in a stolen car. Police believed Assad had been watched before the attack, and in an extraordinary detail, a police officer conducting surveillance nearby witnessed the murder, but the gunman still managed to escape. Then, in March 2017, Hells Angels associate Kemal Barakat was shot dead inside his Mortlake apartment. Investigators later examined possible connections between Barakat's murder and the earlier execution of Assad, as Sydney's underworld violence continued to spread through an increasingly connected network of criminals, gangs, and outlaw motorcycle clubs. Pasquale Barbaro, known as the Pretty Boy Gangster, because of his love of designer clothes and expensive cars, was shot dead in November 2016 after leaving dinner with an associate in Earlwood. Security footage captured the moments before the execution, with the gunman approaching Barbaro and opening fire before fleeing the area. Police later linked his murder to the earlier killing of Sydney standover man Joseph Antoon, with investigators alleging Barbaro had been involved in organising Antoon's murder 3 years earlier. Barbaro's killing was not the result of a chance encounter or an argument that suddenly turned violent. It was a carefully planned execution, with those responsible waiting for the right moment to strike. By 2020, the long-running feud between the Hamzy-Alamdine networks had erupted into open violence on the streets of Sydney. On the 19th of October, Majid Hamzy, the brother of Brothers for Life founder Bassem Hamzy, was outside his Condell Park home when gunmen emerged from a vehicle, chased him down and shot him dead. The killers escaped, and his murder became another major escalation in a conflict already responsible for repeated shootings and revenge attacks. Less than a year later, the violence reached another prominent member of the family. In June 2021, Bilal Hamzy was leaving a restaurant in the heart of the Sydney Central Business District when a car pulled alongside him and a gunman opened fire. Hamzy was killed and another man was wounded as the attackers escaped through the city. The location made the execution especially brazen. This was not a quiet suburban street in the middle of the night. One of Sydney's most prominent underworld figures had been gunned down in the centre of Australia's largest city, surrounded by restaurants, businesses, and members of the public. The Gold Coast saw one of the most carefully planned underworld executions of this period on the 12th of October 2020, when Mongols motorcycle club member Shane Bowden was ambushed in the driveway of his Pimpama home and shot 21 times. Police alleged the murder was the result of an extensive operation involving months of surveillance, tracking devices secretly placed on Bowden's vehicles, and a team of men assigned different roles in the plot. 8 men were eventually charged with murder as part of the investigation into the killing. The scale of the planning set Bowden's execution apart, with experienced Queensland detectives describing it as one of the most sophisticated organised crime murders they had investigated. Mick Hawi had once stood at the top of the Comanchero Motorcycle Club, serving as its national president before becoming one of the central figures in the infamous Sydney airport brawl that made headlines across Australia. On the 15th of February 2018, Hawi was leaving a gym in Rockdale when he got into his car and was ambushed by a gunman who opened fire through the window. The attack showed that Hawi's movements had been closely watched and that his killers knew exactly where and when to strike. His funeral drew a huge turnout from Sydney's underworld, with a long procession of vehicles and mourners travelling through the city. Former Lone Wolf member Yusuf Nazlioglu was later charged with Hawi's murder, but acquitted. 4 years later, Nazlioglu was himself targeted. In June 2022, he was shot multiple times in the underground car park of his Rhodes apartment building and died in hospital the following day. Nazlioglu had survived an earlier attempt on his life, but this time there was nowhere to escape. His murder became another example of the cycle of shootings and revenge that had become deeply entrenched in Sydney's underworld. In April 2022, Mahmoud Ahmad, known as Brownie, and the younger brother of murdered underworld figure Walid Ahmad, was shot dead outside a home in Greenacre. Police had repeatedly warned him that his life was in danger, and reports claimed there was a $1 million contract on his head. Despite those warnings, he continued moving around Sydney and was eventually caught in a carefully planned ambush. The gunman struck outside the Greenacre property, before escaping in a vehicle that was later found burnt out nearby, a method that had become increasingly common in Sydney's gangland murders. Mahmoud's execution came almost exactly 6 years after his brother Walid was gunned down inside Bankstown Central, leaving two brothers dead in two brazen public attacks and showing just how long Sydney's underworld feuds could continue. Alan Moradian was a major figure in Sydney's underworld and a convicted cocaine trafficker with links to the Comanchero motorcycle club. His own wife had once compared his lifestyle to that of a television mafia boss, while police intelligence reportedly linked him to several major figures and conflicts within organised crime. On the 27th of June 2023, Moradian entered the underground car park of his apartment building in Bondi Junction, where two gunmen were allegedly waiting for him. He was shot dead inside his car in a carefully planned ambush. The location showed just how far Sydney's gangland violence had spread. Moradian was living in one of the city's most affluent areas, inside a secure apartment complex, but once he became a target, the money, connections and security around him were not enough to keep his killers away. Gavin Preston, better known as Capable, was one of Melbourne's most feared underworld figures, with a long history of extreme violence that made the nickname particularly fitting. On the 9th of September 2023, Preston was sitting outside a cafe in Kayla East when two masked gunmen approached in the middle of the morning and opened fire. Preston was killed, and another man sitting with him was seriously wounded as customers and bystanders scrambled for safety. The execution was carried out in full view of the public, with the killers showing little concern for who else could have been caught in the gunfire. Preston had spent years surrounded by violence and was well aware that his own life was in danger, but in the end, his killers found him doing something completely routine, sitting outside a suburban cafe having breakfast. Nick Martin's murder stands apart from almost every other execution on this list because of how it was carried out. The former Rebels Motorcycle Club president was attending a public drag racing event at Perth Motorplex in Kwinana in December 2020, when he was killed in a long-range sniper-style attack. A former soldier positioned outside the venue fired a single shot from a high-powered rifle, killing Martin and wounding another man sitting nearby. Martin was surrounded by friends, family, and members of the public, including children, when he was shot. The gunman was later convicted of the murder, and prosecutors alleged he had been offered $150,000 to carry out the contract killing. It was an extraordinary execution, planned around a single shot fired from outside a crowded public venue, with little regard for the innocent people surrounding the target. Tariq Ayoub, known in Sydney's underworld as the Angel of Death, had survived previous attempts on his life, but on the 26th of August 2024, his luck finally ran out. Ayoub was attending an early morning meeting in Parramatta when he was ambushed in a carefully planned execution. More than one gunman was believed to have been involved, with multiple shots fired before the attackers fled the scene. Ayoub had spent years moving through Sydney's criminal world and had reportedly built up a long list of enemies, leaving investigators to examine several possible motives and suspects. After surviving previous attempts to kill him, Ayoub was finally caught in the open, where his attackers gave him little chance to escape. Sam Abdulrahim, known as the Punisher, was a major figure in Melbourne's underworld who had survived several attempts on his life before he was finally killed. His long-running feud with crime figure Kazem Hamad was reportedly linked to the murder of Kadir Ors, a close friend of Hamad who was shot dead in 2016, with Abdulrahim accused of involvement in setting up the killing. What followed was years of violence, threats, and repeated attempts on Abdulrahim's life, including a shooting outside a funeral in Faulkner in 2022 that left him seriously wounded. Abdulrahim reportedly changed his routines and movements as the threat against him grew. But on the 28th of January 2025, he was ambushed in the car park of the Quest Serviced Apartments on High Street in Preston. After surviving years with a target on his back, one of Melbourne's most notorious underworld figures was finally caught by gunmen who had been waiting for the opportunity to kill him. Most recently, on the 23rd of May 2026, Sydney underworld figure Lorenzo Lamalu was shot dead outside a restaurant in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. His murder was reportedly linked to the violent conflict between the so-called Coconut Cartel and the Ahmad-Dine network, showing that a gangland feud centred in Sydney was no longer confined to Australia. Lamalu had travelled thousands of kilometres from home, yet the people targeting him were still able to find him and carry out the execution on a public street in another country. His death became one of the most significant killings connected to the conflict and reinforced what police had been warning for some time. Australia's organised crime networks now operate across international borders. Lamalu's murder also sent a chilling message to others caught up in these feuds. If someone can be tracked down and executed on the other side of the world, how far do you have to go to truly be safe? The violence shows no signs of slowing down as Australia's underworld continues its battle for control. Police have made arrests and disrupted major criminal networks, but the killings continue. New groups have emerged, new feuds have started, and more people have been targeted. After decades of gangland executions across Australia, there is little to suggest the violence is going to end anytime soon.